Dear friends, I'm Muqtadar Khan. I'm a professor of Islam and Global Affairs at the University of Delaware. I'm also a co-founder of the Delaware Council on Global and Muslim Affairs. Last week, on April 6th, I attended a very interesting conference on countering violent extremism in Washington, D.C. The conference was hosted by Creative Associates, a global player in education and development, and International Peace and Security Institution, a think tank in Washington, D.C. that promotes peace and security. Countering violent extremism, this conference was held 1 year after the White House summit on countering violent extremism. The term itself is very interesting. It is a replacement for what the Bush administration used to call as a war on terror. But the differences are not just linguistics, but profoundly philosophical. While war on terror clearly implied use of force and an aggressive posture towards terrorism, countering violent extremism is a step back from that approach, and it recognizes that there is more to terrorism out there than just violence. It is, in my view, I think, an attempt to recognize that just dealing with the symptoms is not the solution, but we need to also address root causes of terrorism. So, countering violent extremism is a recognition that there are fundamental structural, historical, economical, and political reasons why terrorism persists so viciously across the globe. And therefore, it is an attempt to apply a comprehensive and complex approach to eradicating extremism and violence that stems from this extremism. So, in that sense, it's a major positive step because now countering violent extremism goes beyond invasions and use of drones, but it also talks about addressing poverty, creating jobs, building institutions, addressing issues of marginalization, not just in the Muslim world, but also all over the world. Why are Muslims in Europe getting radicalized? There is a recognition that there is a marginalization, social political alienation of Muslim populations in Europe, and countering violent extremism is, at least in theory and principle, supposed to address this. But what is also interesting is that even though the word countering violent extremism does not specifically identify Islam or hold Muslims culpable because they are Muslims, nevertheless, the focus of government institutions is solely on Muslims. So even though the word says countering violent extremism, implying that we are looking at other forms of violent extremism, make no mistake, the government is only looking at Muslims when they talk about CVE. For example, in the past few years, clearly white supremacists have committed more acts of violence in the United States than Muslims. But when we talk about CVE, we're not looking at white racism. We are not investigating speakers who instigate white racism. So when we are talking about CVE, we are essentially focusing on Muslims. And in the American context, the focus is clearly on American Muslims. But there is a silver lining to this, that the government seems to have recognized that it cannot deal with the challenges that it faces on its own and needs the help and support and participation of Muslim communities. And therefore, one of the most important components of CVE is engagement with the Muslim community. At this conference, I met some of the most important players in countering violent extremism. The keynote address was given by Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Honorable Jay Johnson, and he made some very interesting and insightful observations about Muslims, recognizing the diversity of Muslim communities and also recognizing the fact that we are such productive and important and enriching members of the community of the country. But nevertheless, the focus is clearly on American Muslims. So, having said that, I think this step back from the use of language of war on terror to dealing with extremism itself is a positive aspect. Extremism and terrorism hurts everybody. It hurts Muslims, it hurts American Muslims, European Muslims, it's hurting Muslims who need help from the rest of the world because it's contributing to the rise of Islamophobia, it's undermining the image of Muslim communities, of Islam. And if there is a genuine attempt under the rubric of countering violent extremism to address root causes, of poverty, of disenchantment with modernity, of exclusion, absence of human rights, absence of social justice, the democracy deficit, etc., then it behooves that we, as American Muslims who care about America as well as Muslims and also the teachings of Islam, should perhaps step forward and engage with the US government. Now, engaging with the government does not necessarily becoming extensions or instruments of the government's policies in countering terrorism or studying and understanding the Muslim community. That also means giving feedback to the government about the consequences of some of their misguided policies, but it also helps. It also means that we engage with the government to give them more insights into what are the root causes of Muslim disenchantment, what are the ideas that can radicalize Muslims and how to counter them, how to develop a counter narrative to the narrative of radicalism. So overall, it was a very interesting conference. I'm not going to summarize all the interesting things that were said at this conference by many of the stalwart voices in countering violent extremism in Washington, D.C. today. I invite you to read the article that is attached to this video, or this video is attached to an article about that conference. And I hope that we can open a dialogue between us. I look forward to your feedback on this idea of countering violent extremism, this new approach to radicalism and terrorism, which has probably the signature of President Obama on it. Thank you very much.